Good
Hello,
morning.
good morning.
Hello, hello.
It's so
Buenos dias.
awkward. Welcome, everyone. We hope that you had a wonderful weekend. Did you have a wonderful weekend?
I did. I was with my salvation.
Yeah, what were you doing this weekend?
I was dancing with you.
Oh, yay. We had a kitchen dance party.
Yeah.
Cool.
Good morning. Hope you enjoyed that. Strumbellas, my salvation. Pretty darn good.
Yeah, super good song.
And the turkey vulture on the screen,
PDG2. Yeah, that's fantastic. And this leaf here.
And the shape, like there's...
It's gorgeous.
Yeah. This is awesome.
Thank you. It brings me joy.
This is the limit of we don't record the intro.
Yeah.
The welcome, because Google doesn't like us to, rightfully so, have use other people's music and post it on the internet, blah, 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 proprietary, blah, blah, blah. However, I love recording the filling in, the coloring. So maybe we'll do that. Yeah, it's great. Next time. Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you. Next time we have some coloring. Well done, you.
Okay, I'm going to clear, though, because we're going to get started, right?
We should.
Because
why not?
We have opinions and things to say. Cool. Okay, clear. Oh, it pains me, Smith.
Well, that's all right.
Okay, ready?
It's going to be recorded in the video. It is recorded.
Yeah, okay.
As long as the video is recording.
Good. Okay, awesome.
I now will have residual beat in my shoulders from the Strumbellas.
Okay, good. Let's just go straight to here.
Ooh.
Yeah, because you probably have some things that you want to talk about.
Yeah. Well, this happened earlier this morning, and if you haven't heard about it yet, it's kind of good news.
Cool.
It's pretty cool. It's an evolutionary biologist from Sweden, Svante Pääbo, who has won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for their study over decades of of human evolution, and facilitated by technological and theoretical advances that they helped pioneer regarding the integration of ancient DNA, both mitochondrial and nuclear DNA, that really help us understand why we are here, where we are, what comprises us in relation to other hominids like the Neanderthals. You've probably heard the 1 to 4% of your DNA. If your DNA originated in Europe, that 1 to 4% of you is Neanderthal DNA. That's Svante's work. And that's kind of amazing. As a long-armed, red-headed person whose ancestors came from Europe, I felt like that spoke to me, that result.
Yeah.
So, pretty cool.
Yeah.
And there's a picture. I like the picture. Often the Nobel Prize Committee will, since the advent of social media, will tweet out a picture of the award recipient as they receive the news. And this is apparently his kitchen.
Wow.
Which I kind of like, because I look at that arrangement of stuff behind him and I'm like, that's just a person's kitchen. You can zoom in on the picture later and be like,
he has good taste in jam.
What kind of jams? What kind of, like, Swedish people? There's a lot of good berries on the ground there, but you can see whoever took the picture there's been some urging to clean up, because there's newspapers that have just been like thrown on the floor to clean up the table, but they aren't quite out of frame, and I love that. It speaks to the humanity. I think the other thing, my last thought about Pääbo is the fact that he has renownedly wide interests, and he received a lot of criticism early in his career for interest in Egyptology and the study of a whole bunch of broad things that people throughout his career told him, like, drop that, focus, drop that, focus. And I think one of the cool things about this is this reward for his breadth is, if you're broad and interested and keen and receptive, if you live kind of a yes and kind of a research life, you end up covering things that other people haven't, in a way that other people haven't thought of before.
Yep.
So,
yay.
Retain your breadth, retain your interests.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Good. Yay.
Oh. Yeah.
We will be happy to talk about Respondus again. Yeah, good. We'll deal with that for sure. Okay. It's not right now, but we're on. Okay, cool. So today marks our transition from evolution to ecology. Hooray! So practical purposes, this week's material is not on the topic test for evolution because we're moving on to ecology, right? So just practically, we'll put a bookmark in last class. That was the last evolution class. And then moving into ecology, obviously that's for the ecology topic test. That's going to come up a little bit later in the semester, okay? But it is really important that we not stop talking about evolution, okay? Because it's all kind of integrated and amazing and part of explaining biodiversity. So as we move forward, we basically take with us the previous topics because they're relevant. And they play a really important role in explaining the why and the how of biodiversity. So we're gonna take it, this week is gonna be pretty chill because you've got your topic test, so we totally appreciate that. But we'll just kind of throw at you some interesting connections and some ways of thinking about how it all kind of gets integrated. Yeah, cool. So just a little reminder of where we are. We're in the middle third of the semester. That's good. We're like getting through it. Everything's going to be okay. We're going to spend a few weeks talking about ecology. Ecology is a really challenging topic. Part of me wants to say that it's the most challenging of biology, is that it's the most challenging for human brains. Maybe there are some other things out there that can make the connections better, but I find it really challenging because it's got sort of more possible outcomes. It's got more possible explanations, more sort of different mechanisms to weed out to get to the root of you're like itching to say something.
Yes. Yes, I agree with everything that you're saying. Okay. And I think it's also the one that we as a society here in the West teach our children out of, because we teach about means. You've had to endure calculus and very little classes about probability or variation. And ecology is about variation and about accepting and understanding. Biodiversity is kind of like that too. And then the other element that I think it's challenging is when you're in physics, there's a meter. Like, we agree what a meter is. It's not dependent on which kind of physics you study. And if you study chemistry, there's a mole, and it's not the interesting one that I'm interested in. It's Avogadro's number or the avocado number, and it's the same. And that's kind of one, that's a elegance. There's an elegance to that. But when we're talking about biodiversity and ecology, we're talking about species, and there's more than 36 different concepts about what that is. So this is a hard thing. So as you experience frustration, celebrate it and share it, because it's going to be natural. There's some people all over campus that are having trouble with Wi-Fi. I'm sorry about that. And if we are lagging, make sure to check out the YouTube later on. That won't be appreciated. I apologize. But it made me laugh, and it made you laugh, and that makes me happy.
Oh my God. Hashtag dad joke. Okay, here we go. So it can be, it's going to test your patience for moving away from, this comfort of like one problem, one answer to maybe a problem and perhaps some answers.
Some answers to consider.
Yeah. But it is a really good way of introducing some critical thinking skills as well. So we're going to kind of try to weave all of that in. Okay. And we'll do it together and it will be okay. Here we go.
Well, so, it's all over. Bullring, north, south, library.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
All over the place.
You know what? We're not going to do the Menti then. We're just gonna get you to in the chat. Don't open up anything else. Don't sign into anything else. Yeah. The university got hacked. I mean, they're not talking about it, but
we can't talk about it.
We're not allowed to say.
It's like Voldemort.
We didn't. Yeah. So anyway, there's huge problems all across campus. It's horrible. Okay. So we're not going to do the Menti, but if you want, you can write on my screen, or you can pop it in the chat. And so let's try to like talk about precise language. So we're going to first get rid of all of the like imprecise things. So let's like just do a brain dump of like all of the things. What comes to mind what might we mean when we say the word biodiversity? And again, just like brain dump, put stuff on the screen, get it out.
On the screen in the chat.
Shake your head.
Yep, I see some in the chat already. Easy.
It's not coming out. There we go.
I see some good things in the chat. If the chat is easier, then yeah.
Good. Yay. You're all amazing.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're our salvation.
Good.
I'm gonna audibly say some of the chat things as you got your chats. Yes, vultures.
Yes.
Species, genetic variety, species richness, lots of different organisms and species living in an environment. Variety.
Good.
I see variety popping up. Lots. I see the measurement, the amount of measurement is again. We're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
With a Star Warsy theme.
Yeah. Good. These are great words.
Yeah,
all of the ones that I see here.
Yep.
Variation, diverse levels, all living things, variation, lichen, yes, populations.
I liken it too.
Okay, super good. Yeah.
The number of species in an area, biotic factors. Oh, look at that. Variation in genetic species and ecosystems.
Good.
Just getting I like it.
Okay, super good. So
put your right hand up, pat yourself quickly on the head.
Or on the
Give your
back.
hat. That's very good.
Yeah, good. And some folks are writing here, oh, beauty. Yes.
I like it.
Yes, it is beautiful.
Yep.
Okay, and bananas.
And avocados.
And avocados. Okay, super good. So let's clear this, and with all of our thanks for your participation.
Well done, you. You'll see it later on in the PDF.
Okay, so let's kind of dive into precise. Now, when we say we have to be precise for our conversations, okay, and for our course. And we also have to celebrate the fact that we have to continue to be precise because not everyone is going to use these operational definitions. Other people are going to be working at different scales. So when they talk about biodiversity, they mean a completely different scale of system and all of that. So just kind of keep that in mind, that the skill that we want you to learn is the ability to be precise, not necessarily always keeping with you the same definition. Okay. So what do we mean by biodiversity? Dr. Smith, not one simple definition, okay? Super important, right? The definition that you use always depend on the questions, and you may have to change your definition, right? As you change your questions. If you're if you're looking at genes, or you're looking at, species, or you're looking at your genes, or you're looking at communities of species, your definitions are going to have to change, right? And your metrics are going to have to change, and they're going to have to be relevant and meaningful.
So I love the fact, sorry for that interruption, but I love the fact that it ties back, it encompasses and brings in that hierarchy that we talked about right at the very start. Yeah. In week number 1.
That's right. Yeah. Good. Okay. So we can talk about all sorts of different things, right? And we've got them here. We're not going to read them to you. You can read. But just appreciate that it can happen at different levels. Okay. The whole idea about variation becomes diversity. So like you have genetic variation in different traits and all of those things. And then all of a sudden we start talking about diversity, which is kind of the same thing, right? We're just talking about the gradient of difference. We're calling it a different word. We're applying it at a different scale. Okay. So just know that in biology, there are these words that are often tied to certain sort of scales or certain levels on the biological levels of organization.
And so, when you're thinking about biodiversity, and as you jotted on the screen, one of you said vultures, and maybe more of you said, but I saw it once. And then vultures. There was in the chat, species came up a lot. Yeah. And so, when we talk about species, and maybe if you're going to go visit friends or family over the upcoming long weekend, they'll say, "Oh, you're in this biodiversity course. What is So they talk about species. How many species are there?" And potentially as they're eating one of them, and they think that's maybe a simple question, and you're like, oh, push the plate away and be like, that's a very complicated question. There are a lot of species. A lot of species. Naming them is a non-trivial thing. This is kind of it's a square pie. It's kind of a tiled map, a quilt. It's not a square pie. Okay. It's a quilt of life that looks at where most of the biodiversity, the named species on the planet resides. Most of the named things are insects. Very few of them are vertebrates like us.
And there are way too many spiders for my comfort.
We are very good at naming things in these blue tiles, these blue quilt squares, that see the world the way that we do. As soon as you get into species that don't see the world at all, they smell and they taste it, we're not very good. So there's multiple answers. There's about 2 million named species. That's not it, though. Some people think we only have 8% more to do, that we're 2% done, and there's probably 10 million species on the planet that we need to name. I'm not in that group. I think we have much more data that supports the idea that there are, at a minimum, 100 million species, maybe hundreds of millions. And that's kind of both overwhelming, exciting, and sad, because of course this process of naming is going on as we are living through creating the Anthropocene, and we are causing the accelerated rate of extinction of many or most of these things. I love the quilt. But I like the pie graph because it lets us talk about tortilla and the fact that if you were to have a slice of the tortilla of life, it's going to taste like bugs.
If at any point you can avoid making a pie chart,
yeah,
please avoid it.
Email us. There's some easy things. Like I've been going through this with a colleague over the weekend.
Pie charts.
Spiders are so pretty.
No, they're not. They're horrifying. Okay.
Hold on. No. Let's have a. I'm gonna have like a Rito. What's a Rito? A blind that goes bias.
Yeah. No. And the other day, actually, not the other day. Last night there was this beautiful centipede in the carnivorous ones. Yeah. In my bathroom, it was gorgeous. But spiders, I don't know why. Okay, now. We need to tie in evolution and ecology, okay? And I love these things, right? This to me just gets me so excited to think about and to try to explain. So we have a whole bunch of things happening kind of at random, right? Things are mutating at random. Things are being, kind of like evolving and changing and breeding and all of these things. But nothing ever happens in a test tube or a vacuum, right? There's always this context. And it can have equally, if not more important implications than what actually is going on within the genes. It's basically the fishbowl to all of life. And if you mistreat that fishbowl or if you change up the conditions, it can completely redirect what's going on. So ecology becomes the context to evolution, and the context really, really matters. So how can I explain why it matters in like a kind of a cool story? Think about a bear that lives in the forest. And the bear is kind of a dark brown, kind of a black color. And the bear beautifully matches in with the forest, with the background, right? And is able to sneak up on prey, is able to hide from predators. Everything's really great, right? Because the color of the bear matches the background super well. And imagine that bear wandering up onto the tundra and wandering out of the forest and getting further and further north, such that now the bear really stands out on a snowy background, okay? And imagine that there are some mutations that happen totally at random, right, over generations and generations and generations, such that that bear, that species, or its offspring, eventually have a white coat. Okay, white coat on a snowy background is really good, really beneficial, right? And it's able to hide from prey and predators and all of that stuff. Perfect. But imagine then that the amount of snow over time changes and the Arctic or the tundra warms up, And all of a sudden, that snowy coat becomes a problem because now it's easily seen on the tundra, both to predators and to prey. So the context really matters, and the context can change. So something that could be seen as adaptive in one context could be maladaptive in another context. And that's really, really critical to understand. So when we say it depends, it totally depends on the ecology. The ecology is what matters, right? Because it provides that context. And so when we take a look back at our phylogenies and we mark these speciation events, we have to understand that these are happening within a context, that you cannot predict what's going to happen at each of these things by merely looking at the genetics alone. We have to understand that in each of these, there is an associated ecology, an associated context. Something happened where the conditions were available for a speciation event that resulted in a barrier to gene flow that stopped or blocked the ability for these populations to interbreed. And then, of course, the ecologies would be different potentially, and the context would be different, and speciation would happen.
It's a great question in the chat.
Yeah.
Can you ever, from M. Sue Sill, can you ever prevent a speciation event? And yeah, it happens the world does it all of the time. There are things, because speciation is a process, and because this context that we've been talking about, this ecological context, can change over long periods of time, over evolutionary periods of times, a single species can begin to walk down the road of speciation until there is the removal of that ecological context, a division that might have prevented interbreeding. And then if they retained that capacity to interbreed, they've just kind of created intraspecific variation. And they can march back together again.
That's right.
And we see evidence of that. We use genetics. There's a whole field of genetics called phylogeography, which looks at kind of the geographic distribution of genetic variation, which is essentially trying to understand the history of isolation and almost speciation.
Cool.
Great question. Can you force it?
Yeah,
you could.
You totally can.
They've seen the agar plate.
Yep.
Yeah, that's kind of thinking of like along that line.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I love this.
So, if you think about,
why does everything evolve into crabs? Take 2700.
If you think about sort of the ways in which you can create barriers to gene flow, there are two sort of classic kind of variables that you can manipulate, right? You can manipulate space or you can manipulate time.
It's like very Einsteinian.
Yeah, a little bit. You can, or timing, or, sort of the sort of more natural history details of things. And so we can have allopatric speciation or sympatric speciation. And basically what allopatric means is that the population is divided physically, like geographically, it is divided. Such that over time, with random mutations that are happening in population 1 and population 2, because they are random, over time these things become dissimilar, right? Now, it's possible that they don't become so dissimilar that that they remain the same species for quite some time, but it's also way more likely that over time they're going to become different species just as a function of these random mutations.
So this is probably the process that was you've been introduced to in your trainings thus far as a biologist. It's your mountains, it's your rivers, it's your earthquakes, it's your Pangea and the drifting of it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Less supported historically and kind of more exciting is to be able to think about, I like to think of this next example as from the perspective of the organism.
Right.
You're in the same place. We catch you at the same place. We see you at the same place, but you don't see the place in the same way as we do.
That's right. So we have this like bias, this filter that we introduce, right? And we're like, oh, I'm here, my body is this big, and so that's kind of how everything experiences the world. Not so much. And so sympatric speciation is far more subtle and far more beautiful. The idea that there are these, competing variables in these situations. So imagine here in our little pictorial, we have a population of fruit flies, where some of them prefer coconuts or papayas, I think it is actually, and others prefer bananas. And over time, even though they are in the same place, they are functionally just not experiencing each other, the ones that prefer bananas and the ones that prefer the other fruits, such that over time they become functionally separated, even though they're in the same place. Okay, so this is something called sympatric speciation. And there could be many driving factors for this sort of functional separation, this barrier to gene flow, even though they are in the same place.
But I think it's really important to bring it up now in your training as biologists, but also because we're talking about ecology. Because really, this is one that has so much to do with ecological adaptations, with context.
Yep. Context matters, always. And so when we're thinking about it, we're going to be thinking about it about tree species and forests and urban forests and woodlots and all of that stuff. And so we have these, I don't know if any of you have seen this tree. It's possible. We once had a student that was like, oh yeah, I can see that from my house, which was cool. Okay. But we have things out in nature, and some of them kind of stand out. And some of them have been there for a long time, like this comfort maple. For 500 years, potentially. And we start to ask why, right? Why are species where they are? And then, of course, because I like to flip things around, why are they not where they aren't? And all of these things are sort of questions where there are hypotheses that can be tested. So that's really what we want to get at in this unit is to say, okay, here's the observation. What are the potential hypotheses and how would we go about testing it? We're way less interested in what the actual answer is. We want you to just think critically and move through the different processes of thinking in order to be able to, to confidently say, well, we could do this to see if it's that, or we could do this to see if it's this other option.
I always Google at this point in the year.
Yeah.
So not only how did the species get there, but is this example still standing? Or have, since the last time we taught this class, has it fallen over? It is not. And
the tree is still there?
The tree is still there.
Good.
And if you or your family live near St. Catharines or Welland,
Yep.
you might have visited it before.
Yeah. Cool. It's a big tree. It's beautiful.
There's a link in the chat.
Yeah, the colors on it right now probably look a lot like this. So, yay. Okay. And then we can ask, why aren't species where they aren't? Like, why are there no polar bears in Antarctica, right? Or why halfway up a mountain or at the top of a mountain are there no trees, right? So why do we have this thing called tree line, both with elevation as well as with latitude, right? You know that we have this global tree line that goes around on a latitudinal gradient. Now, it doesn't just it's not like a perfect line, straight line. It kind of wiggles and wobbles and dips down. And if you take a look at Google Earth, if you take a look at Canada, it is absolutely crystal clear where tree line is. And it's beautiful to see this like huge line from space, right? Across the country. And we can ask, why are there no trees above that line? Why is it lower in one part of the continent and higher in another part of the continent? That really helps us understand sort of what ecology is and the relationship that life has to the physical environment. Remember, ecology, sort of the ecosystem was that thing that came out of left field, that physical part that like messed up our nested hierarchy. So we're going to kind of start to integrate those questions and those variables into answering them.
Great questions about exactly that. I've always been so curious as to why Norway's tree line reaches so much further north in Canada. Great question.
Yeah, exactly.
There's some answers.
There are. Okay. So again, we're not going to do the Menti because we're going to just take a break on the like bandwidth and all of that stuff. So let's take a look at why are species found where they are and not where they aren't. So let's think about Norway, or let's think about anything that you're super curious about, a difference, right? So what might some of those variables be? Feel free to write on the screen.
Whiteboard?
Crazy. I don't know. It'll be really complex. Okay. Feel free to write on the screen or to pop answers in the chat.
I
so
see
just
some
like
popping up in the chat already.
Great.
That's great.
Super. Good. What might some of those? I love the short answers. This is really great. Yeah. Good.
Amazing.
Yeah. Go. As many as possible.
Oh, look at them all jumping.
Yeah.
I love it.
Super. There's one there.
Oh, there's an isopod.
There's an isopod up there.
That's lovely.
Hold on.
Environmental conditions abroad. Kaboom!
Yeah. Good.
Conditions where they can survive based on genetics.
Yep.
Specific habitats to survive. Atmospheric. Lack of spreading methods. Dispersal methods.
Good. Niches. Good.
Temperature. Soil. A bunch about soil. Geology. Biotic and abiotic factors.
Super. Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Amazing.
The vast majority of these things are, absolutely. Nutrient availability, different types of environments.
Excuse me.
Human interference. Great. Yes. Okay. So all of these factors, right? Which means, though, that not all of them are relevant to the situation or the context that you're wondering about, right? And the skill in ecology is to weed out sort of which ones are not relevant to this situation and which ones are, knowing full well that you could move 500 meters away or 5,000 kilometers away, and it will be a different combination of relevant variables, right?
Somebody, I just want to pull out as a specific one that we talked about elevation a couple of times, and someone is advocating for the marine environment and talked about depth, which is super important.
Super important, totally. Yeah. Okay.
That's a very deep answer.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want to delete your drawings, but I think no, you can still see, right?
Legible.
You can. Yeah. Okay. Let me know if you want me to delete this. Okay. So we're gonna throw some words at you, right? And here's some vocabulary that you might be able to use. And there are more, but there are sort of 5 broad level reasons for why species are where they are and not where they aren't. So, and how a species can be in a place, right? So you can start to test using this list, right? You see something, milkweed that's like in your backyard, you can start to test out, why it is there or how it got there. And the first one is endemism, and we've used that word before. That just simply means that it evolved there, right? Random mutations, natural selection, all sorts of other non-selective processes have just simply resulted in this species evolving there, and we call it endemic, okay? The other reason could be range expansion. It means that it evolved somewhere else, but that the range of that species increased because of the change in context in the ecology and the abiotic factors or the biotic factors. But expansion is different than shift, okay? So range expansion means like the total cubic meters if you're going to talk about the ocean, or you're going to talk about square meters if you're going to talk about the surface, or cubic meters if you're going to talk about depth in the terrestrial system. The total increases in size, okay? And the original range is incorporated into that surface area, okay? A range shift is different. It means that the range is moving. It means that there's some loss and then some gain. It may also increase in size, but there has to be some loss, especially like in the original part, okay? So that's a shift. The long range dispersal means that there's a jump, there's like a hop, so there's like a blank space where the species isn't, and that can be for all sorts of different reasons, different mechanisms, where there's a break basically in the distribution or in the range. And then vicariance is the thing that folks kind of, it's kind of hard to wrap our brains around vicariance. Vicariance is when the habitat itself changes location. So we want to think like really large scale, like continental drift. Okay. So like, continents are like breaking up and moving in different places, right? Bringing with it whoever happens to be eking out an existence on that particular piece of land. So that's where the habitat itself is moving rather than the species. Okay. And there are other ways that you can get vicariance. You can have, continental rebound, for example, that jumps up as a result of retreating glaciers that create sort of mountain ranges or that get flooded in different sort of water basins and things like this. So it's the habitat that's like moving around rather than the species. But it's really challenging to kind of describe, especially sort of, in a few minutes. But think just like continental drift, plate tectonics, things like that.
Can I just say, you guys are on fire in the chat. This is awesome. You've got lots of great we've been talking about all sorts of things, and they are great. So your
Super.
multitasking capacity is astounding to me.
Okay. Great. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to start to apply some of these questions and these ideas to our second inquiry case. It's on forest biodiversity. And we're going to play with the concept of a forest at different scales. So it's hopefully going to introduce, again, this idea of having to define things to your context, recognizing that they could be different in a different context. That's why I'm going to clear, because I do want you to get your stamps ready. Here we go. And what we would like you to do is to use your stamps and tell us which ones are forests.
I love this question. I don't know if the internet speed on campus has increased, but your stamping capacity is unlimited.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Evan's gone straight to like just picking a box and checking off all of the boxes. Okay. Excellent. That's really good. Okay. So clearly, there are ways of looking at most of these as though they were forests, right? The definition of forest is elusive. And it really is subjective, right? The way that different populations of people think about forests is incredibly different, right? So if you think about number 3 up here, you are absolutely correct in thinking that this is a forest. It's a tundra forest. It is absolutely covered with willow species that are 60, 70, 80 years old. And you can even see them turning the fall colors, right? Turning red as the canopy, which is only a few inches high, starts to drop its leaves. Other folks would think about number 5 as being their forest, right? This is where they hunt and where they collect food from the kelp forests. And they're incredibly important, right? Because they are host to a whole bunch of species.
I mean, we're introducing the variability and the variation in this diversity of understandings of forests, because that's important. And you can even scale it back. It's kind of fractal in that, because you can say, well, what's a tree? Yeah. You've probably, maybe some of you have your own guidebooks to the trees and shrubs of Ontario, or other guidebooks that talk about those two terms. And how do you differentiate? So forests are probably related to trees, but what's a tree? What's a shrub?
Right. And take a look at number 7. Number 7, for the people who live there, number 7 is not only a forest, it's also a garden. For number 7, there's all sorts of different communities around the world that use existing forests as a means of protecting their gardens. They tend to them. So these are not species that would occur there naturally. They are planted or they are maintained by people in a way then that provides nutrition and provides all sorts of benefit to the local people. And so this is a picture of a garden by our definition, and certainly by the definition of the people that use it. And so we look at it and we're like, yeah, forest, but there's more meaning and more value in that photo to those people. And it's kind of different, right? Number 8, we might call a plantation. We might call that a crop. And so for many folks, this is not a forest as well, because it doesn't have the same complexity and the same type of ecological context that you might expect in another situation. It would certainly be, if you were looking at it in terms of a management and policy plan, it would certainly be very different in terms of conservation and policy of management than, for example, number 4 or number 1, right?
And if you're somebody who studies the ecology of plains or steppe things, or if you're a species that lives in the plains, this functionally is not that.
No, it's not that.
It is a forest to them.
That's right. And it certainly wouldn't be able to replace something like number 6, yeah. Right? There are differences there in terms of, complexity. And so, yeah, for many of us, depending upon who we are, sorry about that. The definitions are different, right? And the relationships that we have to these different images are very different. And so I'm drawn to certain images here, you're drawn to different ones, and we value them in very different ways.
Yeah, human societies, I come from a part of the province where a lot of the people that live there are employed by the forestry industry, and there's only some of these forests with which you could do that. And then there's the relationships between some thinking that, well, we can harvest one and replace with the other, and it's like, well,
That's right.
You can, but is that a forest?
That's right.
So many things that bring in both the ecology, the sociology,
the cultures. Yeah. Okay. Super important. So how do we even begin to tackle all of these things if there is such difference? And the answer is we can't do it alone, right? You can't study number 3 without making sure that Indigenous peoples and Inuit are involved in those questions or those discussions. In fact, not only involved, but leading them, right? Because you're going to get it wrong, you're going to define it wrong unless you are from those areas, unless you are Inuk. Okay, so just keep that in mind when we go into these places. And we have asked you to go into these places. So many of you have been to the Dairy Bush. We hope that you enjoyed that time together and the opportunity to breathe outside and to think outside in the fresh and clean air. Here's the Dairy Bush.
You recognize where you came from. You walked up. Blah, 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 blah,
you walked along here, right?
Right. Met the TAs and the team at the corner.
Here, right? Or here?
Right, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Good. And so you've explored it. And this is a place that's near and dear to both of our hearts. Smith has been going there for 680 weeks. Once a week at least, to take a high-resolution gigapan image of the same place, which is bananas and wonderful and incredibly valuable for science. And we'll talk a lot about that. We'll get to hang out with.
And we have seen bananas.
We have seen bananas.
I brought them, but yeah.
So this is the same place, and you can see the same tree here as your marker, right, kind of down the middle, just to the left.
That's a white pine. Some of you are on campus and you can see Zavitz Hall. That white pine, all of the white pines in that part of the bush were planted by Zavitz.
Okay, cool. And it's kind of the marker that is used so that we can understand that we are in the same place, and that place changes. The ecology, the context, the abiotic factors, all of those things change throughout the year, throughout the seasons, throughout the decades, right?
Can I have another one?
Uh-huh.
So farther back in this area, since I mentioned that some of those are planted, I just want to, if you didn't get this part of the story, there are maples in this area that have been cored, that people have looked at dendrochronology.
Ooh,
So
cool.
they've counted, they've drilled in and they've extracted a tiny little sliver of tissue and they've counted age rings. And some of those trees have never been cut. This is first growth. This is uncut. These are trees that are older than the European establishment of the city of Guelph.
Nice. Okay. Thanks.
Oh, I see like lots of things about the nice things. I love it.
Yay!
This is about, yeah.
Save the dairy bush. Okay. So we have developed a sort of inquiry case for you. So we're going to move away from freshwater mussels. Sorry about that. And we're going to move into woodlots and tree diversity and things like this. And we're going to do it on a small scale. So we're not Great Lakes anymore. We're going to be zooming into the University of Guelph campus. And in fact, when this was developed, when this case study was developed, the university was in the process of deciding which parts of the university were they going to sell off to housing developers. And in many cases, that's kind of already happened. It's really quite interesting. So there are parts of the university properties that have been developed for housing, but the ones that we're going to be talking about are largely untouched. Though there are some things that are going on in this corner here of the Arboretum. Actually, it's kind of like this corner over here. Okay, so we've got the Arboretum, which is huge, and so we don't show all of it here. Number 4, we have the North Campus Ravine, which is here. We have Brown's Woods here, and then the Dairy Bush here, okay? And they're different in many things, right? There are all sorts of differences. There's difference in terms of the perimeter and the shape of them. There's differences in the surface area to perimeter ratio that's really important as well. And we're going to use these as opportunities to learn more about why biodiversity might be different, especially at this rather small scale. To do that, we've developed a series of sort of icons to represent different species. And please don't get like hung up on, you know, whether the buckthorn here is different from the Manitoba maple and how do we tell the difference, or maybe, you know, the black walnut really does look a lot like the blue ash. Like, please don't worry about those things. The most important thing when you go through these exercises is that you define them, right? So you go, okay, there are 3 species in here, and then you do the work that we've asked you to do, okay? We're not gonna say how many species are here, and if you don't say 9, we're going to dock you a point. No, that's not the point. The idea is to use the concepts and use the formulas and things that we're going to introduce to you over the coming weeks. So don't worry about it. Also, your screens are going to show different colors depending upon what screen you're using, so please don't worry about any of that, okay? More important to go through the exercises. So this is what so we've kind of like reduced the dairy bush to like this for the purposes of what we're going to do over the next little while. So this is the dairy bush for the purposes of this course.
I can see my place.
You can see your place? Okay, so this is the dairy bush. This is Brown's Woods. And this is North Campus Ravine. And we're not going to iconify the Arboretum. It's just way too big. So we're going to deal with 3 of them, okay? And what we'd like to do today is force you to make a decision before we leave, because we're going to see how that changes over time. So if you had to pick one of these to sell to a housing developer, which one would it be? And go ahead and stamp on. Wow.
Interesting.
The dairy bush is not doing well.
No. Got our work cut out.
Yeah, we have our work cut out for you. That's great. Thank you. That's so good. Okay. So hold on to this. So in order,
Great. As a question in the chat, as a biologist or as an investor?
Ooh.
Yes.
Yes.
You can be both.
Okay. And inevitably D, none.
Yeah.
Very good. That's fine too. So Dairy Bush is not doing well, followed by Browns Woods, followed by North Campus Ravine. And so we'll keep that in mind. We'll ask you a couple of times throughout our conversations as you learn more about this, because I hope what some of you are saying is like, how can I make this decision? Based on what information? We gave you a little bit already in the readings, right? But the information matters, right? So it really matters. What information, as we say goodbye to you, what information do you still feel you need to know? So pop it in the chat, put it on our screen. What information do you want to know to help make your decision?
Which one is the M?
Which one is the most eco? How many species? Great question.
Good questions. Species other than plants. Impact of keeping versus selling. Species. Topography. Somebody said hilly. Yep, because we've showed you a very flat view of the world.
Which has the most animals and plant species. Who am I selling this to?
Yeah.
Amazing. Green species pathway.
Which creatures are any of them at high risk? Species rarity. That's a great word.
Are there species at risk that live there? The age of the forest.
What's the impact on the surrounding area?
Do I get a house? That's an important. Oh my goodness, that is such an important question. Yes, Thank you for that. Bodies of water. Hashtag save the dairy bush. What will the impact be? Yeah. Rare species, size of the woodlots.
Non-endemic, least valuable in terms of research and education.
Yeah. What impact be? What will it be on the surrounding area? Can we add a few? Whose unceded land is it, and why are we deciding? Who uses those woodlots or those natural spaces currently right now, and what will be the change to their lives? How does cutting down that forest benefit society? Super good.
Will the ghost of William Brown come to haunt me?
That's brilliant.
Will Dr. Doug Larson come and get me?
Yeah, good. So I hope, like you've already introduced these really important human questions, right? These societal questions, cultural questions. You've already put on some super important biodiversity questions. Are there any rare species? Are there any endangered or threatened species? What's the value? What's the benefit of doing it? Fantastic. So thank you. And we're hopefully going to be able to answer some of those things throughout this ecology unit, because it's messy, it's chaotic. There's all sorts of different things to consider.
So we're going to say
thank you.
Turn off, stop the recording, take care of each other, be kind. We'll see you Wednesday.